Hello, everyone. I'm really thrilled to have my guest here today. He's a writer, producer, director, and an author too. And we're talking about his books too. He's got a current one out called Home's Coming, and we'll ask him about that too. But I'm absolutely delighted to welcome the creator of the Incredible Hulk TV series, The Bionic Woman, the TV series, Alien Nation, to name a few. It's Mr. Kenneth Johnson. How are you doing, Kenny?
I am wonderful. And thanks for calling me Kenny Frank. That's what all of my family and friends have always called me, at least to my face.
You're very welcome, Kenny. It's lovely to have you here, by the way. This has been a long time in the making, actually. I think I've been trying to get this sorted with you for over a year, I believe.
It
Um,
wouldn't surprise me, but I appreciate your diligence and I appreciate your interest, and I'm eager to hear what questions I can answer for you and overwhelm you with past exploits.
oh, yes, yes. I can't wait to dive into it. First of all, Kenny, let's start with you did work on some of the $6 Million Man episodes. I think you directed a few, didn't you? If I remember
Well,
rightly.
that's what I did was my I had been a director for a long time and a producer director back in live television in New York. Frustrated that I was not yet getting my foot into film, which is what I had always intended to do. And finally, I came out here, and after considerable success back east, I came out here and said, "Okay, here I am, ready to do movies." And Hollywood said, "Oh, but you like working live TV and stuff and documentary." I said. And I was really frustrated because I discovered I was actually sleeping on the couch of my friend Stephen Bochco, who had been a Carnegie classmate with me at Carnegie Mellon in the drama department there. And Steve had already come to Hollywood and gotten his foot in the door at Universal Studios. And he said, Kenny, you should write. That way, if you write, actors can do bit parts and work their way up, and writers can write on spec. But unless you have already directed for somebody else, nobody wants to hire you to direct. So it was a real catch-22 because I never thought of myself as a writer. I didn't think I had those talents. But Stephen just badgered me and badgered me, and finally I just started to start writing, and I discovered I could do it, Frank, and I could write pretty fast and with pretty good stories, and I became quite a prolific writer of unproduced screenplays,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is the way we all start. But Steve liked one of them particularly and passed it along to Harv Bennett, who was a big time executive producer at Universal. He was doing Rich Man, Poor Man, and a number of other major miniseries. But he had also sold this show called The $6 Million Man, and they were a mid season pickup, so they'd already done about 12 episodes. But now they were just diving into their first full season, and they had hardly any scripts. And
Wow.
Steve gave my script, one of my screenplays to Harv, who really liked it. Said, "I can't get it produced for you, but how'd you like to give me an idea for some $6 Million Man episodes?" And the first thing that came to mind, of course, was The Bride of Frankenstein. It seemed like a logical thing to have a female counterpart. And Harv liked the idea and asked me to write it, which I did very quickly and
Yeah.
in about 10 days. And they loved the script, but thought it was too dense. There was too much going on. And I said, well, I told you that you were trying to pack all this mission stuff into it. And there was also, I was trying to do a love story. I said, well, what do you want me to cut? And he said, oh, we don't want you to cut anything. We want you to make it longer, turn it into a two-parter. I said, but you only have 1 hour episodes. He said, yeah, we'll do two 1 hour. It was the first time anybody thought about doing a two-part episode on a 1 hour episodic show. And I was thrilled and delighted. I said, do I get paid again? and I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, it's a whole new script.
Yeah.
So I did that, and he liked it a lot, and also recognized very quickly that I had a lot of producing and directing chops. Has gotten to see some of the other stuff that I had done and my credits and all, and invited me into the editing room with him on shows he was already working on, and I was he just sort of took me under his wing and made me an integral part of the whole creation of the Bionic Woman and casting Lindsay and everything. And very quickly offered me a job as writer producer on the $6 Million Man. And I tried to beg off and say, Harv, I'd really rather just write and direct for you. Producing is kind of a pain in the ass, and you don't have time to do what I'd like to do is be on the set with my teams. And Harv said, "Here's the story, Kenny. In television, the producer is the guy that hires the writer and hires the director."
Yeah.
So I processed that and said, "Okay, that's a job I'll take." And
Yeah.
so I joined Six Mill. There was one other writing producer named Lee Siegel, a very talented guy, who was really overwhelmed because there were no, and he had one story editor, and that was it. This was back in the day when we didn't have rooms full of writers. There were no writers' rooms then. It
Yeah.
was for the a writing producer and a couple of others, and then you try to use outside writers because you try to use outside writers to come in and help bring you ideas. But I took that gig, and very quickly I was doing like every other episode. The way we laid it out was Lee would do one, I would do one, and Lee Siegel would do one, and I'd do one. And so we were going back and forth. And I ended up writing, I think, 11 of the 12 or 13 episodes that I produced, and totally rewriting the other three that somebody else had written. And it was fun because the great thing about doing an episodic television show, Frank, is that you know the script is going to get produced because they have to put something on the air.
Yeah.
And the universal motto was, "We don't need it to be good. We need it to be Thursday." You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the trick was to try to make it good and get it out on Thursday, and it was a challenging thing. So I was producing the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman incidentally went on the air. Obviously became a huge hit and brought 6 mil up into the really the attention of the public for the first time. And then they decided they wanted me to bring her back to do the return of the Bionic Woman. They had forced me to kill her off when I wrote my original script. I kept saying, "This is a bad idea, guys. Let me just put her in a freezer somewhere, you know." And they said, "Oh, well, we want to do love story." That was the big thing that year, you know, the grieving man who was left behind from his loved life. But so I did. I killed her off, and then, of course, the mail began to come in about from people all over the country about how they loved it and they wanted to bring Jamie back. And the networks and the studio noticed that the ratings had just shot up enormously. So they came back to me and they said, "Yeah, we want to bring her back. Why'd you kill her anyway, Kenny? That was a dumb idea, you know." And that was like, genius, guys. So I
Yeah.
devised a way to sort of put her in a hibernation and bring her back. And it was a huge success that took the $6 Million Man into the top 10 for the first time when we did the return of the Bionic Woman. And then immediately ABC, Freddie Silverman decided he wanted to spin off the Bionic Woman as a separate series, which meant and I was concerned about it. I mean, obviously you make more money when you're doing two shows at the same time, but you're also find yourself living in a garbage disposal, Frank,
Mm.
because it's just so hard to do one show at a time, much less two,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
particularly when, as an executive producer or the showrunner on the show, you don't have time to go down and direct. You know, you're too busy getting the stories ready and the scripts ready and the shows that are shooting and making sure they're shooting right and then doing post at the same time for the ones that have already shot. You know, you're like the admiral that makes sure the fleet is sailing in the right direction, but you don't have time to be the captain and be on the ship and fight in the battles, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so finally, I let go of 6 mil and just stayed with Bionic Woman, and that was the right choice for me.
Yeah. That's great. That's really fascinating. Uh, Leaping a wee bit ahead here, but not too much. Getting onto the Incredible Hulk. Okay. Which is why a lot of us are here for.
Sure.
And we get onto that in a little while. Where some of the guys were sending questions for you about the Hulk,
Right.
but it became hugely popular. I mean, how it transcended to television from the comics. It was obviously radically different. It had to be. Um, but Are you surprised, Kenny? 45 years now, we're celebrating the Incredible Hulk since the pilot. Are you surprised that you're still here talking about it 45 years later?
I don't I quite believe that it could have been 45 years ago because I feel about 3 years older than I was when I started.
Yeah,
I've had
yeah,
arrested development at about age 25 forever. I still talking to you feel like I'm talking to a grown up here, and the kid in the room that how do somebody's going to discover it's what is it the imposter syndrome,
yeah,
but no,
yeah,
it's amazing and it's also wonderful and I think that it's because of what we tried to do in the show, which was to totally pull it away from comic books. I was originally offered the Universal had acquired five of the lesser Marvel characters at the time for the ridiculous price of $15,000. That's what Universal spent for five Marvel characters and they were sort of the lower echelon ones, except for Captain America. That was one that they offered me, but there were also the Human Torch and Ms. Marvel and a couple of others. And I just didn't want to do comic book stuff. Frank, I'd been trained at Carnegie Mellon in the classic theater, and I'd run a film society for 4 years, putting myself through school and seen 400 or 500 of the great classic epics and films of the cinema. And I really, wanted to do serious stuff and at least have an eclectic career, if nothing else. And so I really didn't want to do anything derived from a comic book. And I read I looked at well, I was in the middle of reading Les Miserables. Maybe you'd heard that story. At the time, my wife Susie had given me the book, which she read when she was about 16, I think. And I'd never read it. So I had Jean Valjean and Inspector Javert pursuing him and the fugitive kind of concept in my head. And I thought, well, maybe I could take a little Victor Hugo and a little bite out of Robert Louis Stevenson, Jekyll and Hyde thing, and this ridiculous thing called The Incredible Hulk. And so and turn it into a real adult project about a guy who had brought down the curse upon himself in the classic tradition of Greek tragedy, where the protagonist messes with stuff better left to gods, and the gods don't like that when you do that. And so he had brought down the curse upon himself, and I said, and it needs to be a really sort of dark and psychologically deep story. And Universal liked the idea, and so did CBS. And I also said, just leave me alone and let me cast it the way that I want. And I jumped in and I wrote the pilot, the 2 hour pilot, in 7 days. Actually, it was very fast. And we shot the white pages of my very first draft, and that's what it ended up on the screen. And the only actor I ever had in mind for it was Bix. I had seen Bill Bixby in a play, a television play called Steam Bath in 1973, and in which he just was the most astonishing performer I'd ever seen. He just hit all the bases of that, the whole range that any actor could dream of having in there. And I sent the script to Bill, and his agent told me that when he handed it to Bill, Bill said, "I don't even want to read a script that's called The Hulk." And then his agent said, "Yes, you do," and he did. And he called me the next day and came over we'd met just casually a couple of times, but I'd never worked with him. And he came storming into my office at Universal, just like when Bill came into a room, all the oxygen went out, because he was just such an extraordinary persona and personality. And he said, "Is this what we're really going to do? Are we going to do a psychological drama? Am I going to suffer?" Actors love to suffer, Frank. So that's important always. And it's going to be an adult theme. So I said, "Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're going to do." And that, I think, is the part of the reason that it's because it surprised people when it went on the air. It surprised the critics. It surprised the audiences. They were sort of thinking, "Oh, this is going to be another comic book show, Green Monster on the loose." But then suddenly the adults were watching and said, "Wait a minute, this is not what we were expecting." It was right from the very beginning a very powerful drama with a very empathetic hero and star in Bix that really drew the audiences in, and that's what carried us along. Our largest audience group was adult women. That's the major number of people that watched the show were adult women, and then men, and then teens, and then kids. It's the ideal thing for television. Is what they call a four quadrant show, when you've got hit those four bases, and we hit them hard, but particularly women. And in all of the work that I've done in science fiction, Frank, the female audience has always been the largest segment of my audience. And I think it has carried on and maintained its popularity because of what we tried to do in terms of having it have some real substance and some psychological depth and emotional structure. And it's wonderful for me that I still get the same kind of emails today that I got 20 and 30 and 45 years ago, from people who were touched by it or saw it when they were a kid and now look at it again as an adult and realize how much was really going on sort of under the surface. And it's incredibly rewarding to have that kind of popularity, and it's humbling, and I'm always sort of amazed that it happened that way.
Whoops, I was just muting there just while you were talking there, Ken. Uh, yeah, it's astonishing to me. The drama side of it, the human aspect to it, to the stories. The troubled people that he met, not the fact that he had a problem, but the people he met had a problem, and he had to kind of deal with that
Well, yeah,
as well.
what we tried to do thematically was, we would say, okay, what makes this a Hulk episode? Why is it a Hulk episode as opposed to an episode of some other show? And it was because the underlying theme was really self-control, was really how to control the raging beast that dwelled within him. But in Dr. Banner, his demon within was anger. But with other people, it could be alcohol, or it could be drugs, or it could be obsession, or it could be greed, or it could be, so we tried to make the episodes as much as we could manage about something. A writer might come in and start telling me a plot line that he had or a story. I say, no, don't tell me the story, don't tell me the plot, tell me what it's about.
Yeah.
And one of the most popular ones that people always tend to comment on is about the abused woman and child that Banner got involved with. Because when we wrote the script, CBS said, no, we don't want to do this. This is not a Hulk episode. I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, there are no bad guys. And I said, guys, don't you see the parallel, the allegory that we're working on here? How the creature beating up on a human is like the human beating up on his kid or his wife. And they fought me, and I said, listen, I'm going to make this. If you don't want to air it, fine. But this is the show we're going to do. And of course, that's one of the ones that won so many awards, and still people talk about today when they look back on what we did.
Also, I wanted to bring up something I've been curious to know about. I'm not sure you've ever mentioned it in an interview before, Kenny, but I want to ask you anyway because it's been puzzling me. This in the episode called "Terror in Times Square," um, which was credited to on screen to Alan J. Levy, I believe. I'm curious because I've seen some sort of behind the scenes shots of it. There you are, directing Lou running along Times Square. So I'm curious to know how that happened, where you came in to just direct those sequences rather than Alan.
Well, because I knew what I wanted to get. What I was trying to do, this was one of the very early episodes, and what I was trying to do was to make it believable that this big green guy with that ridiculous wig that we never could get right was running around in the real world. And this was the whole challenge of doing the whole concept in the piece, Frank, because it's an unreal character, and it was a comic book character, and I was doing everything I could to try to invest real world values in it. That's part of the reason I changed his name from Bruce Banner to David Banner, because I hated that comic book trope of alliterative names, Lex Luthor, Lois Lane, Clark Kent, Peter Parker, and all that. And Stan understood that when I told him what I was trying to do. And Stan understood also that it had to be different to live in the real world and to work as a drama that adults would come to. We had to make it live in the real world as much as we possibly could. And so when we started putting the scripts together, I went to Frank Price, who's head of Universal, and I said, "Listen, the most real part of the real world that everybody in the world knows is Times Square, Frank." I said, I want to run him through Times Square. And Frank said, "This is a great idea." And Alan was directing the episode itself, but and I said, "Okay, I will take Lou, and we will go, and I'll pick up a very small crew in New York. We'll take our makeup people with us, obviously, and we just shoot for a day." It was a very, very cold day in March, and so it was just me there directing that piece. I didn't bother to put my name, as the co-director or something like that. And Alan was doing the show, and that's what was fine with me. Alan was a wonderful director. Did a lot of episodes for me, also on Bionic Woman, and a great friend always too. He and I worked out what he would be able to do on the back lot on New York Street at Universal Studios to tie in with what I was going to shoot on Broadway and also on Park Avenue. We also ran him up Park Avenue. And so it was just a very cold day in March when running down Broadway with the police behind us to make sure we didn't get killed. I was curious if anybody would even notice in Times Square, because it's so freaky in Times Square, particularly back in the 80s. But so there's Lou in his freezing and with just a shirt dangling on him, running down Broadway with the Steadicam operator running behind him and me running behind the Steadicam operator, looking at his monitor, making sure we're getting the shot. And it was great because there was 1,000 extras around us, of course, in every direction, and people were looking at him, as of course they would be if he really was running down. And we got a couple of shots from the top of the building in Times Square where the globe comes down, so I could really put him in the middle of the real world, and that's what I was trying to do. And then Alan and I sat down together, and I showed him the stuff that I had done, and how we would arrange the shooting that he had to do that would tie into it, so that it would be seamless. And it's funny because I had been struggling. Stan Lee and I had a disagreement about the second 2-hour movie that we did. I originally did a 2-hour pilot, and there was an agreement with CBS that we would do a second 2-hour movie. The first would be my Genesis pilot, how it happened and the story got started. The second was a 2-hour movie that Alan directed, actually, because I was busy doing Bionic Woman still at the time. And in the script for the second movie, I wrote a fight with a bear, and maybe you've heard the bear story. I don't know, but just very quickly, Stan read the script, and he didn't give us any big notes ever about the scripts. He just said, "You know what you're doing, Kenny, go do it." But he said, "Look, I love the bear. The bear's great. It's such a cool thing. But, Kenny, it ought to be a robot bear." And I said, "No, Stan, you see, let me explain. We're asking, and you can't ask an adult audience to buy that much. We're asking them to buy that Bill Bixby metamorphoses into Lou Ferrigno, and that is a really big buy. And if you add a robot bear, Stan, but he said, but you did a robotic, bionic Bigfoot kind of thing." I said, "Yeah, but that was on a show where we were in the world of robotics and cyborg organisms and all. This is not where we are with the Hulk. We're in the real world, and we got this big green guy running through it." And he's, and we had gone around and around. And when we broke for lunch while we were shooting in New York that day, Stan's office was just a block over on 6th Avenue. And I said, I got to go over and settle this issue with him, because it was still sticking in his craw. And I went in to see him, and he came steaming out of his office like Stan steams in, like Bill does, and said, Kenny, did you get the letter I sent you?" I said, "No, what?" And he said, "I sent you a letter saying you were right and I was wrong. No robot bears, not real, doesn't work. Just do what you're doing." So it worked out fine from there on.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I remember that bear thing was, yeah, it's gone down in history, that one, with
The
the green
the
paint
other
coming off from
Well,
Lou and
the
everything.
green,
Yeah.
whenever that was the problem, we were still in the first two movies. We were using grease paint because there was no green pancake makeup, and you had to have grease paint. And you bumped into Lou, and you got green all over you. And that the same thing happened with the bear. Every time he'd get in a fight with a bear, and then they'd split up. Poor the bear, whose name was Pooh, incidentally, it was Pooh Bear.
Ah.
Pooh would be all green. And the funnier part is that I have a red green blind color blindness oftentimes, particularly when it's close to brown. And
Ah.
in the dailies, everybody around me is laughing about, what are you laughing at? And he said, well, look at the bear. I said, what about the bear? He said, he's green. I said, he is? Oh, okay. It was challenging, but we had a good time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Right, Kenny, I've got some questions sent in for you about the
Okay.
Incredible Hulk. Um, so we'll get to those, and then we'll see how we do after that.
Okay, doke.
Right, let's see where we are. Oh, here we go. Right, this is from tongue twister. The Incredible Hulk, Lou Ferrigno and Bill Bixby dedication group. I'm glad I wrote that down because I wouldn't remember it
Right, a good idea.
on Facebook. And the moderator of that page is Scott Fowler, so I thought I'd give that man a mention, Scott, there,
Hello, Scott.
and he runs it really well. So the first question is from Stephen Gallagher, and he asks you, how was the ding transformation sound achieved for the Hulk outs?
When we did it in the one of the things that was not in the comic book. I mean, basically, all I took from the comic book was gamma, a little bit of gamma, something or other, and he turns green, which I didn't agree with. I said he should be red because that's Rage is red, but
Yeah,
Stan wouldn't let me. He let me change his name, but he wouldn't let me make him a red Hulk until they did later on.
yeah, yeah.
But I wanted a trigger mechanism so that when we saw the white eyes, that's why I said let's use the white eyes. I had used them actually on the Bigfoot when I did the $6 Million Man episode, and it's very creepy. And when the white eyes came into the makeup department, I remember I sent Bill down to go try them on. We were in the middle of shooting the pilot, and when he came back walking toward me, and he said, "Hey, Kenny," and I look and see Bill Bixby, this big mega television star with these white eyes and this big grin, and I thought, "Oh my God, this show is going to be a hit." And but I wanted a sound. I wanted a sting, a real sting, and it was and I talked to Joe Harnell and our sound effects guys about it, and it was a combination of sound effects. But it was also a really, really high strings kind of thing. And also, I wanted human voices in it so that it would have this aura of humanity about it, but still be very, very high. It was like I sort of used as a model the piece that Ligeti wrote that was used by Stanley Kubrick in 2001 when they're on the moon and it's the apes are going and you slowly and there was a very high dissonant kind of choral thing. So we blended all of that, a little bit of music, a little bit of stingy kind of sound effects, and the orchestral quality under it, and that's what we did. And we had to find a cheaper way to do it for the series because when you're using a chorus, they get paid like actors do because they're all part of the Screen Actors Guild. And suddenly you got to pay 10 extra people if you want a chorus. So we had to try to find a synthetic way to do it but just using a couple of people, real humans, and then the voice synthesized sound that sounded kind of human to make it work. But that's what we did.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, it's so iconic that it's that in itself, that sound, isn't it? Because you know what's coming when you hear that, or when you see the
Right.
eyes and then that ding, and then you go into it. There's no turning back at that point.
Well, see, that's the reason. That's part of the reason I did it because, first of all, I wanted to know, oops, we're past the point of no return, and secondly, it gave me the opportunity not to have to show the full transformation every time. Once we saw the white eyes, Bix can get thrown into a closet, and we knew what was happening in there, and
Yeah.
we knew it was coming out. But
On some episodes, you don't even see that. You just hear the sound.
yes, that's right.
But immediately you know what's going to you know what's going on. You don't didn't even show the eyes.
That's
But
it. But we did have a lot of fun finding different ways to make the transitions work. I mean, when we did the pilot movie, I was struggling with, okay, how do I expand this human being? And we tried getting wetsuits, dry suits for scuba diving that you could blow up and inflate. That didn't work. We went through all kinds of odds and ends until finally I said, let's just do this. Let's put a really tight shirt on Lou and we'll make the seams a little weak so that we could pull the thread out at the bottom and it would sort of zip up and he could
yeah,
expand out, and we had to do it in cuts, and the facial transformation, it was embarrassing because I mean the only technology we had at the time was the same technology that they used on the Wolfman back in the 1940s,
mm,
where you put makeup on Bix and you shoot some film, and then you take him away and you put some more makeup on and you shoot some more and you do a series of dissolves and this was decades before CGI was even dreamed of. So it was frustrating to have to try to do too many facial transitions.
so oh yes, there's a question from Darren Nicholson, and he asks you, in the two-parter story called The First, um, why didn't why didn't you get another bodybuilder to fight Lou rather than this tall, skinny fella?
Well, it's interesting. We Harry Towns, I believe, was the guy's name who played that, and this is one of several episodes that is always comes up the battered wife, the abused child thing, and the abusive relationship, and my pilot movie, and also the one we did with Marriott Hartley, where which she won the Emmy for Best Actress in a Drama Series that year for that performance. And then the big Prometheus two-parter that I did later on. Those, along with the first, are the ones that people always seem to ask about the most. And I don't honestly remember the answer to that. I'm sorry to say to Darren. I think we must have toyed with it, but it was very hard to find the kind of people that had the acting ability. I mean, my original casting of the Incredible Hulk was Richard Kiel, who was a studied actor and really good, and also 7.5 feet tall, way taller than Lou was. And he was an actor because I wanted somebody that would be able to really act. And Lou, was 24 years old and had never done anything other than the bodybuilding, and he'd been in a couple of documentaries about that. But I think probably what we went for was, let's get the best actor we can, and he can be as strong as we want him to be, but he doesn't have to be a Mr. Olympia.
Yeah, it's although I must admit, when I was a kid, he did scare the hell out of me. So he was effective in that sense.
Oh,
He
that's
frightened the.
exactly.
That's one thing that sticks in my nightmares was the look of him was pretty
Yeah.
freaky. you know.
Well, and yeah, and he was a really strong actor, a wonderful guy to work with. A friend of his recently wrote me who knew him very well and had let me know that he had passed on a few years ago. But he was really terrific. And what we the actor is the most important thing, and getting the emotion out. And one of the things that developed with Louis as the show went on. I mean, here he was surrounded by a lot of great actors, including Bix, including Jack Colvin, who, in addition to being an actor, Jack was a terrific acting coach and acting teacher.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
with them around him, and be able to whisper in his ear and give him some coaching and some stuff I was able to help with too. I mean, Louis just developed over the series because some of the moments that were to me the most enjoyable and to watch were the scenes after he had his temper tantrum and was coming down, and he was no longer wanting to smash things up, but he was still an innocent, and he was still outside the world, and that way we could have people teach him how to open a soda can, and that kind of thing, and Louis began to really develop as an actor as we worked through those scenes, and we began to write more and more of them in because it was kind of touching to watch this guy with special needs trying to work his way into the world. And Stan has often too commented about why I decided early on Hulk not talk. Hulk talk sound dumb, and it would be really goofy. And Stan really applauded that a lot because he really felt that again in an effort to try to make it as real as we possibly could. If Hulk talked like that, it's going to sort of pull you out of the movie.
I agree. I think it was a very wise move on your part to not have him speak. You know, um, Sean Brosnan asked you, other than the well, let's see if I'm getting this right. Okay, sorry, a bit more like that. Other than the gag reel that was released, that most people have seen, which is hilarious, by the way. Um, is there any other unused footage or outtakes that still exist out there, and could they possibly be released in a collection? Do you think?
No, there's nothing. There was another season of the gag reel, and that somehow disappeared out of the editing room before I could grab it, and it has never been seen since. When we were doing Married, yeah, it was no, it was yeah, no, it was Prometheus. When we were doing Prometheus, there was a bunch of behind the scenes footage and some of it was very funny, and the crew and cast got to see it, but somehow it disappeared out of the editing building, and I went up to pick it up, and it was just gone, and it's never been seen since. So, but there's. I wish if anybody knows where it is, I'd be delighted to hear about
We all would, Kenny. I tell
it.
you, yeah,
Yes,
it'd be
I
lovely just
know.
to get any new things like that. 'Cause
Right.
we love things like that.
Oh
Um,
yeah, well, you know what it is because the thing about gag reels. I mean, obviously it's funny to us, and a lot of the stuff is inside jokes that the crew and cast would get that audiences wouldn't necessarily think, why is that funny? But what the gag reels show you, and even the old ones. I mean, you see old outtakes from old Jimmy Stewart movies, where he's doing something and suddenly he's looking at the camera and going, "Oh, you're going
yeah,
that way? I didn't know that. Oh yeah, I got to act different." And Bogart had his, and Betty Davis, God knows, had hers. And it's fun. A lot of those you can see, and what it does is it makes them real people. It's like we had a lot from the Bionic Woman too, with Lindsay and Richard Anderson. Richard was famous for always sometimes to get out of a scene at the end of it, he'd pick up his phone and go, "Give me the men's room," a lot of stuff like that,
yeah,
and that's indicative of the kind of fun that we all had on the sets while we were doing it, because it's a grueling life that's not nearly as glamorous as people often think. I mean, you're working 14-hour days as a norm every day for 9 months in a row, and it's a hugely challenging thing for the actors to just survive and get the lines down and get it out on the screen.
yeah. Um, I got a question from Paul Wells. He asked you about the cancellation of the TV series, The Hulk. Um, your thoughts on that, and what had it gone on? What how far did you get with any plans for episodes? Also, have you ever watched the three made-for-TV movies that followed it from the late 80s to the early 90s? Bill directed a couple of those.
Yeah, there were three of them. I was not involved with them at all. I didn't even know they were being done until they were, I think, finished. I was busy filming Short Circuit 2 at the time, and happened to run into Robert Harris, who was head of Universal, at a screening room up in Toronto. And I said, "What are you doing up here?" And he said, "Well, we just finished a couple of the Hulk movies." I said, "What?" Yeah, yeah. Bill and one of my former producer writers, Nick Correa, had sort of got putting their heads together, and I guess decided they want to do it. And I guess Bill wanted to direct as well. So it was fine. It was always odd. I felt that they hadn't even called me to say, "Hey, we're going to do this." By the
Mm.
way, and it was something. It's interesting too because I've never seen any of them. But and it was something Bill and I never talked about, although we were close until the day he died. But it was a subject that just sort of never came up. I think there was a little embarrassment on their part for having not checked in. I heard they were very different and not quite the same quality as what we'd been doing in the series, but no grudge. I mean, I was glad that the guys were working and making some extra money. But as far as the cancellation, it was a stupid move by a man who was only for a short time the president of CBS, because the show was still in the top 15 or 20 when he said, "No, I don't think I want to pick it up for another season." And I said, his name was Harvey, and I said, "But Harvey, we already have 6 episodes in the can for next season." I said, if you have concerns about it not being successful any longer, which I disagree with, they're already there, and you buy 7 more, and there's 13 weeks of episodes, a half a season. And if it's still going along and people are liking it like they are already right now, then you're in. And I said, and not only that, let me tell you the opening show that I would like to do for the 5th season. I said we had established that Bix had a sister in the show, whom he encountered once, maybe twice, in the episodes that we did. And I said the sister discovers that she is dying, and the only thing that might be able to save her is an infusion of blood from a sibling. And this puts our hero in a real difficult position because he wants to save his sister. And yet, what happens when Hulk blood gets into his sister? And I said, and what I will give you is not some kind of comic booky, bra popping She Hulk stuff, but I'll give you a woman that we love, that becomes incredibly dangerous and scary, and it will be a 2 hour opening 2-parter that will take everybody's head off, and then we'll slide on in and do the episodes that we've already made plus more that we can do. And he said, "No, I don't think I want to do that." So it was a huge mistake. And as I said, he was only the president of CBS for a very short time. It was only one of many mistakes that he made. But that was a major one. And we were all disappointed. I was too, particularly because I would always like to have tried to figure out how I would have done a last episode of the series. Was my idea, my plan had always been to try to do a show that brought a psychological conclusion in a good way to our hero, who had been on this really difficult quest for 5 years, but we never had time to even fashion a story or carry it into any sort of script or anything like that, just because they pulled the plug too soon, and it was disappointing.
It's a terrible shame. It is.
Yeah,
It would have been lovely to see some sort of natural conclusion to it, you know.
that's what I felt, and I felt that it would be good for the audience, and it was not going to hurt the show in syndication, because it was, if you know how it's going to end, well, and but no, come on, it would have carried on just fine in syndication, as it did. It was released. My original pilot, was released overseas as a theatrical motion picture,
Yes, yes.
and became the top grossing motion picture in Europe for a couple of months. I remember when Universal called me and said, "You have the top grossing movie in Europe." I said, "I do." When did I? you
Yeah,
know? And then
yeah.
the Married episode, the one that Mariette Hartley won the Emmy for Best Actress, that I also wrote and directed, they released that in Europe as, not my title, The Bride of the Incredible Hulk. And
Yes.
yeah, and it made a pot full of money over there for Universal. I didn't get much of it, but
Uh-huh.
it was exciting to see that it had just been so successful, and people loved the show and what we were doing.
Yeah. Um, I've got the final comment from the fans here. before we get on to the other things you've been doing, you created or are involved with, Kenny. PJ Tech Tour. I hope I'm spelling that man's name right, or lady's name. I'm not sure. Uh, he just wanted to say a thank you to you. He
Mhm.
said, "Thank you for bringing us the Incredible Hulk to television. If this group shown us anything at all, it would be our love for Lou, Bill, and the great decades of entertainment that the show brought us. Um, and uh, if had it stayed on in comic form without your vision, we wouldn't have had such a great program. So thank you on behalf of us all."
Well, that's thank you, TJ. I am flattered and I'm honored, and I have to share the credit with a whole lot of people, not just with Bix and Lou and Jack Colvin and our brilliant actors that we had, but the team that we had and the family that we had on that show. I was just yesterday delivering a eulogy for Tom Reba, who was our special effects guru on the Hulk, and later did. V with me, and then went on to do huge, huge movies like Harrison Ford's The Fugitive, that big train wreck at the beginning of that movie. It's
Mm,
all Tommy Reba. He worked with Ronnie Howard and did all of the firework in Backdraft, which was some of the most
that's
poetic,
some amazing pyrotechnic work on that. Oh wow!
amazing
Yeah.
work. Yeah, and Tommy was a gem, and as was everybody on the crew. It was a real family crew. We all loved each other and worked together for years. The whole Hulk crew, incidentally, followed me right to Warner's from Universal. They came to Warner's with me, and they were the guys that jumped, and men and women that jumped onto V and helped me make that original 4 hour miniseries. Um, and then my editors, one of them, is an English guy named Alan Marks. As a matter of fact, in the pilot movie, Elena Marks was the character that Susan Sullivan played, and that was based on Alan's name, And Alan, bless his heart, is 98 years old. I'm still going to see him for Thanksgiving this year. And Alan, from the day I met him on the Bionic Woman in 1975, if you came up to Alan and said, "How are you today, Alan?" He'd say, "Fantastic," and he still says the same thing at 98. And he and I are hanging on. But it was all of those people, and the writers and the producers and the directors that worked with me, like Alan and Jim Parriott and Nick Correa and Karen Harris and Jill Sherman, who wrote one of their very first scripts for me, and then slowly went up the ladder. I brought them up with me until they were finally producing the Hulk, but the last couple of seasons. And all of those people working together are what made what you have enjoyed, and it's wonderful to when people realize that, and I just always want to make share the glory as it is with all of my friends. That's what you can see actually up here behind me. This is my office in Sherman Oaks.
I see some
And,
photos of
yeah,
the
there's
programs
some
behind
yeah,
you there, Kenny. Yeah,
some photos. My whole career,
lots of
every
photos.
day,
Yeah, yeah.
and they're
Wow, goes all the way
they're
up.
all
Yeah.
yeah, it goes all the way out. Yeah, as I said, there's a second, there's a third floor. We've got a lot of pictures, and and most all of them are of me and people like Tommy Reba, people like Bill Bixby, people like Ricky Gunter, our camera operator, like John McPherson, my cinematographer, who was so brilliant and so neurotic and crazy, but also such an artist. And so many, many people that I worked with over the years. Werner Kepler, who created the original Hulk head for me and went on to work in Alien Nation with me and won an Emmy in that, working with us too. So the family has hung together for a long time. It's been really rewarding, really rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Um, Speaking of V, the series V, uh, um, which starred at the time, I don't think he was that well known at the time, was Robert Englund, who of course went on later on to be like this iconic horror figure of, in the Nightmare on Elm Street films as Freddy Krueger.
Right.
Um, what's your memories of creating V and working on it, Kenny? What can you tell us about that
Well,
time? And
that's
I
a whole.
understand also that you are working on something to try and bring it back, I believe.
Yes, there's
Yeah,
all of that. That's a whole separate show, Frank.
yeah,
The whole
yeah.
thing, the whole V story. But it's funny. The Billy Boyd and Dom who were the two hobbits from Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yes.
They
Yeah.
they have a podcast they do called The Friendship Onion, and Susie, my wife, is particularly a big fan of it. And she called me and she said, "Hey, you got to come in and look at this." And Robert Englund was on their show. This was just last week, talking about V and talking about Freddie and all of that. And he said, "Yeah, Freddie was important, but the thing that really launched me was V." And he said, and it was a and I remember he called me. Robert did when he was out doing public appearances for Freddy versus Jason, and they had these press conferences for him, and he said, Kenny, it was kind of embarrassing for the people that had produced Freddy versus Jason because all the people wanted to ask about were questions about Willie and V. And at one point, the guy that was running the thing said, "Well, okay, now that's fine, but does anybody have any questions that are not about Willie and V?" And all the hands went down, And Bob said it was like, "Oops." But when he was on the Friendship Onion like a week or so ago, he was talking about when he came in to audition for me, and all of those days are a blur because we were running so fast to cast and get the show start shooting. I mean, normally when you do a 4-hour miniseries, Frank, you'd have 4 months or 5 months to prep before you started filming. And when we did V, from the day that Brandon Tartikoff said go until the day I said, it read my script and said go, till the day I said action was 2.5 weeks. That was all the prep time we had before we could start shooting. And because he needed it for the sweeps in February, and the NBC was in the toilet, and he was desperate to have something big and splashy like V, and that's what he wanted. And so we didn't have any, and I had to cast 65 speaking roles while I was also location scouting or arranging the visual effects, getting the spacecraft designed, and so the audition period of every is a blur. But Robert reminded me about it when he was talking to the guys at the Friendship Onion, to Dom and Billy. He said, "Yeah." He said it was weird. I went in to audition for Kenny, and he said, "I didn't know." And I told him, he said, "Kenny, I don't know what to do with this." I said, "You give me a cane or a mustache or something or a mask, I can make a character out of it. But I mean, here I am. I'm an alien who's never been to the earth before. They taught me Arabic, and I don't speak English well, and I'm just lost." And he said, and the great thing was that Kenny just said 2 words to me, and I'm watching this now and thinking, oh my God, what in the world? I said 2 words, and that gave him the whole character, but that's what he's telling these guys, and I'm sitting there totally attentive, trying to figure out what magical pearls of directorial wisdom I had instantly come up with and condensed into 2 words. And he said the 2 words were Gene Wilder. And I thought, oh, that's embarrassing. I actually suggested to an actor that he, do and then I realized, oh no, because what Robert said was that I immediately understood what he was talking about. Don't play it like Gene Wilder would play it, but Gene always had that sort of naivete and that innocence and that lack of self-confidence and that vulnerability and all of that. And Robert said, just hearing those 2 words from Kenny, he said, gave me the whole character. He said, I had it, and that's what we did. And he was absolutely in the moment every moment we were filming, and has remained a close friend over all these for almost 40 years now. And but he still gets there's even a piece that he did on I think it was on MTV, where a girl is coming to see he's playing like the suave guy who's trying to get this young woman interested in him, and come on in, I'll show you all my Freddy Krueger stuff. And she says, yeah, but what about Willie? Tell me about Willie. and he just has this big temper tantrum. Like, doesn't anybody remember anything but Willie? But it was really great, and we had a wonderful time. So, and listen, before we go run away and finish up, I did want to mention, and you did, the fact that I do have a new novel out now, which is kind of fun. It is here it is. It's called Holmes Coming, as in the guy who was known as Sherlock Holmes, and how he suddenly appears in the 21st century, in, as you can see, in San Francisco, and he's still I've always had a fondness for larger than life characters. I guess that's obvious, Frank, and a surprising amount of success with them, and also a fondness for the 19th century writers, 18th century writers, like no 19th century 1800s, like Victor Hugo, Robert Louis Stevenson, those and Conan Doyle. And I was reading this Conan Doyle story a few years ago, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be? Everybody's done Sherlock Holmes one way or another, and it's been done and done and done and done and done. But what nobody'd ever done was to take the original character that Conan Doyle had created and bring him up into the present day to see how he would react. And so I just decided that, not unlike the Bionic Woman, he had been able to hibernate himself because he was a master chemist, and he has taken a step into and hibernated himself in 1899 and wakes up in 2022, and he's still the same eccentric, egocentric, cocaine addicted, sexist genius, but now he's 100 years out of sync, and so his deductions, while they're still brilliant, are sometimes just a little wrong because of the fact that he's in a different place in a different time, and he finds himself beholden to the woman who saved his life, who is a doctor who tells the story like Dr. Watson did, except that she's female and he has trouble with getting around. A female doctor, really? And so there's a lot of that in it, and of course Moriarty finds a way to rear his head in it. His arch nemesis and descendants get into the picture. And it's a comedic mystery with a lot of suspense and a lot of fish out of water humor. And it's the early reviews, I must say, have been wonderful, and so far all the reader reviews that have come in have been super. So it's available at, you can go to, I do have a website which is Kenneth Johnson, just one word, kennethjohnson.us, and then I have a Facebook page which is Kenneth Johnson Author, AUTHOR Author. And you can find out more about the book there, or just go to Amazon and click on Homecoming, and you can find it.
Excellent. That's really brilliant. Thanks for that, Kenny. I'm
You
sure
bet.
people will be interested in that. So yeah, do check out those sites, and if you like that, please purchase the book. And you've got a couple of other books as well, haven't you, Kenny? A
Well, yeah, I do.
few books.
If you go to my site, yeah, I was lucky enough to I've done one recently before Holmes called the Darwin Variant, which is a bit of a more science fiction-y piece, and the one before that was actually, it became a bestseller. It's called The Man of Legends, about a man who brought down a curse upon himself. There's a little bit of Hulk in it. It's about a man who brought down a curse upon himself 2,000 years ago, and he cannot die. He goes through the pain of death, but he always manages to heal, and he can't stay in the same place for more than 3 days at a time, and he has to move on. So he's been on a quest for the last 2,000 years to try to find a cure for, or find out what the reason is that that this was brought down upon him, and the way that he has, when the publisher, that was actually an Amazon book, when the publisher first heard the story, they said, oh, this is great. This is like and he's being pursued by the Vatican. So it's like it's kind of gone right out of my head. It's the Vatican kind of thing that has lasted. Tom Hanks made the movie of, and and also another movie. Forrest Gump. It's a sort of a combination of Forrest Gump and the Da Vinci Code. That's what was not coming out. It was a sort of a combination of the Da Vinci Code meets Forrest Gump. And I said, "What are you talking about? This is a really deep-seated drama, the man of legends." And they said, "Yeah, but he changes history as he goes along," which is true because Forrest Gump affected history in the 20th century. My guy has affected key points in history for 20 centuries and changed the course of humanity many, many times, and sometimes not for good. Sometimes all good deeds go on, no good deeds go unpunished. But it became a bestseller and had for several years on Amazon, and it's still available too. But and Frank, I would love to talk to you more about V and Alien Nation, perhaps down the road sometime too. I can't go to do it today, but there are a lot of stories. Just quickly, I will say yes. We are endeavoring to do a theatrical remake of my original miniseries, which would be followed by two sequel movies based on my novel V, the Second Generation, which picked up the story 20 years later to see what had become of the world. And so we've had it set up a couple of times, and then for some reason when it came to sign the check, there was no ink in the pen. It was like, and the last time was really a trial because this pharmaceutical billionaire, decided he wanted to be in the movies, and he bought the Desilu Studios name, and as the old Desi Arnaz Lucille Ball Studios, and was going to make V his flagship movie, and we actually got a big chunk of change out of him to option the property, and we started location scouting and visual effects and all of that. And then the Hollywood Reporter did a little expose that the guy was really a sham, and he was only using V to try to get people to invest in his company, which was a non-company. There was no there. And it was like, yeah, and he's facing 20 years in prison for wire fraud and mail fraud, and it's like, so it was very frustrating. But we have not given up, and my producing partners and I are still trying to get movie on the big screen, and not a reimagination of V, like people tried to reimagine the Bionic Woman or reimagine V or reimagine the Incredible Hulk, and it didn't work very well the first few times for sure. So I've determined to hang on to the rights until I either get it made the right way or it won't get made. But I don't want to see it get made wrong by the wrong people.
I completely get that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I see.
yeah.
I could totally understand that, Kenny. Well, it's been great speaking with you, seriously, and thank you so much for taking more time than we had planned. It's very kind of you to go through all these questions with me. Um,
It's
and
it was
I
my
hope we
it
can
was my
catch up with each other again some point, Kenny, and elaborate on V and so on if you want to.
That would be great, and thanks to the folks that did write in with some questions for you to pass along to me, it's easy and fun to talk about shows that I've had so much fun doing and have all been a gift to me to be able to do them. And when I know and I'm able to speak directly one-on-one with the people who write me all the time, and I try to answer every email that I get, it's like really being in touch with your audience, and I hope to be forever. And I am forever grateful to the audience and the people out there who have seen my stuff and read my books and seem to like what I've done. And I'm humbled by it all. Thank you so much again, Frank.
You're very welcome, Kenny. And what I'll do is I'll leave, when the video's out of this, I'll leave the links for your website and so on in the description underneath the video,
Absolutely, that'll
so
be
people
great.
can check it out to their heart's desire. And in the
Super.
meantime, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again, Kenny. And
Bye
until next time, take care. Bye bye.
bye.